I don't know. I have a question for y'all today. The question is, if you are working with a buyer and you write a special stipulation in an amendment to address concerns that addresses repairs and put consequences in there, giving the buyer termination rights, and say that survives closing, is there a discrepancy or can you do that? Hi everybody, Dana Sparks, broker of Maximum One Greater Atlanta Realtors and the director of the Real Estate Academy of America. And that is today's question, a very specific question on the survival clause and giving a buyer termination rights. So let me read you the question and I will read you the answer. And the answer is, with guidance and thank you so much to closing attorney Amee Davis of Davis and Associates. And I will link Amy's contact information below, but it is with Davis and Associates Attorneys at Law in Marietta, Georgia. Very well-respected closing attorney here in Metro Atlanta. So let me read you the question. The question is that an agent is working with a buyer and they've done an inspection. They are doing an amendment to address concerns with the seller. And the way it is written up is the seller shall complete the following repairs, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. All parties agree that repair work contemplated and agreed upon herein shall be completed not less than 7 business days prior to the closing date. All work shall be completed by vendors licensed in the state of Georgia to complete the work herein. Seller shall provide to buyer at least 7 days prior to closing evidence of vendors licensed to do repair work, invoices, and paid receipts for all work completed. Should seller, so far so good, you want to have it completed prior to the closing date and you want copies of invoices and receipts and evidence of a license if it is license type work, especially like electrician work, so forth and so on. And agents, you always want to put in consequences of the seller's non-performance. What if the seller doesn't do it? You need to give the buyer options should the seller not complete the work requested in the amendment. So the rest of the stipulation states, should seller not complete work required herein at least 7 days in advance of closing, buyer shall have the right to either, 1, immediately hire vendor of buyer's choice and have work completed at seller's expense to be paid at time of closing from seller's proceeds, or 2, terminate the contract agreement with full refund of all earnest money deposits. These provisions shall survive closing. So the question is there a discrepancy if you give the buyer termination rights should the seller not complete the work and have these provisions shall survive closing? In other words, if the seller doesn't do those repair items and the buyer does not terminate, is the term seller shall survive closing pertinent or not? Because the buyer had termination rights. Well, great question. And we know, well, let me just read you Amee Davis's answer. So thank you again, Amee Davis, managing partner, closing attorney with Davis and Associates Law here in Marietta, Georgia. So the answer, Amy's answer is no, those are not contradicting provisions to have termination rights afforded a buyer should the seller not complete the work and have the statement that these provisions shall survive closing. Here's why. We often have sellers get all the way to the closing table and then absolutely refuse to do something required by the contract. Should the seller get all the way to the closing and say, I'm not paying for repairs, take it or leave it, then the survival clause would allow the buyer to move forward and still pursue the issue after the fact of closing. In an ideal world, we would love for the buyer to be able to go to closing and, of course, have all the repairs completed or vendors paid from the seller's proceeds. While the buyers have either the right to pay for the vendors from the seller's proceeds or cancel the contract, what happens when they want to pay the vendors at closing from the seller's proceeds and the seller says no? The real issue doesn't always work, and we still have sellers refuse to close even with a statement from the seller that the seller's obligated to pay for such from their proceeds. It's very similar to the commission issue. If a seller refuses to close to pay the realtor, we can still close and the realtor can sue after the fact. Now, we cannot predict what a judge would say and how a judge would view the contract, given that the buyer did have the right to terminate. But we can do is try our best to have the buyer still get their home and have the seller pay for the repairs they agreed to at closing. So I hope this contract tip helps you out. Big point is you always want to have repair. If you do negotiate for repair work rather than negotiate for it financially, make sure it's done several days prior to closing, and consequences should the seller fail to do what they agreed to do in an amendment. Thank you guys so much for watching. Dana Sparks, broker of Maximum One Greater Atlanta Realtors, satisfying your needs with service, innovation, and education. Bye. If you like that video, check out the one here. If you like the content on this entire channel, please click here to subscribe. I try to take even the most complicated of real estate situations and make them crystal clear. See what I did there? Real estate made crystal clear. Thank you guys so much for watching.